Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcin Trepczyński. I'm editor-in-chief of Edukacja Filozoficzna, an international journal for philosophical education, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the second webinar of Edukacja Filozoficzna. And today we have 4 papers and 4 speakers, and all the papers will be devoted to philosophical education in Lvov-Warsaw School. Today we will focus on Kazimierz Twardowski and Izydora Domska. And I would like to pass the microphone to Professor Anna Brożek, who will introduce us to the topic and to the plan of today's webinar.
Hello, everyone. It's a really great pleasure to meet at the second webinar on our special issue of Edukacja Filozoficzna, which is devoted to Edukacja Filozoficzna, philosophical education in the Lvov-Warsaw School. We present the Lvov-Warsaw School, the Polish branch of analytical philosophy, as something exceptional from this special point of view, from the point of view of philosophical education. We are convinced that a philosophical program, the program philosophical education proposed in the school and applied in the school is something exceptional that we would like to present to the larger audience. And recently there were some papers on particular topics connected with various members of the Lvov-Warsaw School. Today we focus on 2 representatives of the school which were considered wonderful teachers, exceptionally talented teachers that influence really many scholars. These two teachers from the Lvov-Warsaw School are Kazimierz Twardowski, the founder of the school, and Izydora Domska. She was a student of Twardowski and also a great professor of philosophy at Jagiellonian University after the Second World War. And it's my great pleasure to present our speakers for today that will present their papers. I'm very happy that all of them are young scholars. In fact, they are doctorate students. And these are Ewelina Grądzka from Krakow, from Pontifical University of Krakow, John Paul Pontifical University of Krakow. Then Krzysztof Andrulonis, he's the second speaker from University of Warsaw. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today because of some emergency, but his paper will be presented by our friend Filip Łapiński from the editorial staff of Edukacja Filozoficzna. And our third speaker for today is Krzysztof Nowicki from University of Warsaw. And the subjects of the papers are the following. Ewelina will focus on Kazimierz Twardowski as an author of various programs of philosophical propedeutics. Then the paper of Krzysztof Andrulonis that will be presented by Filip is focused on Izydora Domska as a teacher. And then Krzysztof Nowicki will talk about memories about these 2 particular teachers, Izydora Domska and Kazimierz Twardowski, as they were remembered by their students and the way they as teachers influenced their environment, their philosophical environment. So it's my great pleasure to announce the first speaker, Ewelina Grądzka. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Brożek. I'm very glad to be able to present here. This is my second presentation, and I am very excited to share with you some reflections about the translations, because in this case, I'm going to present some information about translations, but I need to be allowed to present. Can you, Marcin, allow me to present, because I cannot open my PowerPoint presentation?
Oh, yes. Give me a second, please.
So probably Ewelina has sent a request to receive the right.
Yes.
Okay, now
sharing.
it should work. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me start. Okay, As Professor Brożek presented me, I'm maybe not a PhD student, because I recently learned that there is a difference between PhD student and PhD candidate. So it seems I'm already a PhD candidate. I am fighting with my thesis already, not being a student studying something anymore. So there are these two stages in English, apparently. We in this special journal we are going to publish soon, we focused, me and Professor Paweł Polak, with him I prepared an article and the translation focused on the program by Kazimierz Twardowski. And during the research, it turned out that there are more than one program. And to understand the context of the program, which I'm going to show you from 1935, which is the program that we really translated, we have to see other programs, because although in the beginning it looked like it's a very simple task and this is just a program, it was unpublished. Now it's the need to translate it. With the process, it turned out it was very complicated story, and it's very interesting story from philosophical point of view. And of course, something that is interesting from history of Polish education, but I think even more importantly, especially nowadays in context of contemporary discussions about the future of philosophical education and context of philosophy and society, is the context of the programs. Maybe a few words about the subject itself. So propedeutic of philosophy was a subject that was proposed in Prussia by Humboldt, but it didn't stay there, and it was transmitted later on to Austria, which later became Austria-Hungary. And in 1848, it became part of the curriculum. Interestingly, the focus was on developing a human mind of the student. And interestingly, propedeutic became part of pre-college education, how we call this now in English, because there was a development of university level, and it was decided that this material that usually were taught on the academic level should be moved earlier. So, and universities and the departments of philosophy especially stopped being having a servant role for other disciplines, as propedeutic in case of logic and psychology, and department of philosophy got some kind of independence. So this aim of preparation of students for different disciplines like law, medicine, or theology was shifted to gymnasium of the time, which is pre-college education. And at that time, access to pre-college education on gymnasium level was limited, and it was oriented on preparation of elite. And it was important for the Austrian system, because Austrian system had a very developed administration, and finishing gymnasium usually meant that you are either going to be part of this administration system, or you're going to continue as a university student. So this is kind of the roots of propedeutic. And in case of Poland, because Poland at that time was divided into three partition parts, part that belonged to Austria, Austria-Hungary later, was called Galicia. And in this part, as you probably know, but maybe some people who are going to listen to this don't know, this is the place where Kazimierz Twardowski worked. This is where he started the Lvov-Warsaw School. And Lvov, of course, was part of that. So the thing is that when we regained independence in 1918, the new discussion started about our program and how the future of education and what are the cultural values in consequence of the newborn country. So, of course, because Twardowski at that time was already important figure. And as we know, he had a lot of important students. One of his students even became, Łukasiewicz became the first Minister of Education, and he was part of this temporary government that formed Paderewski. So we can see how important were these figures. Even there is a rumor that Twardowski was supposed to take this position of becoming Minister of Education, but finally something went wrong and he didn't receive the offer. So, but anyway, the thing is that even the fact that his student became Minister of Education shows the importance of their influence. And in 1919 starts the discussion, which we're going to describe in a second article. But just to give you some context, that there was a discussion whether propedeutic at all should be part of the curriculum, and then how it should look like. So we have a paper from 1919 of Twardowski that also going to be translated and published in the second special issue that talks about the importance of propedeutic. And we can see that Twardowski is very engaged in this whole process. And on the meeting of Polish Philosophical Society, Twardowski presented his ideas. And they decided to prepare a program to present to the ministry. In the end, this program that was published was not accepted, but we have another program that we can find. So this is an officially published program from 1922. And we managed to find all the other editions of this program. And it turned out it was reprinted with very minor changes that refer to the order of the subject with the last 2 years. So we have a second publication in 1924, 26, then 28 and 31. And just the difference, as I say, is between whether logic is taught first or logic is taught second. So there was a shift in this order in these 2 last programs, but generally the content stays the same. So it turned out that when we compared this program with the program that is found in Twardowski's archive, I have here just the logic program from the archive. I'm sorry, I couldn't find now this manuscript of a psychology program, but logic is from 1921, psychology is from 1922, if I'm not mistaken. So if we compare the content of these 2 programs, it turns out it is exactly, without maybe this very beginning, few lines of the beginning, the content is the same. What it means that the program that was dominating for almost 15 years in Polish education was the program prepared by Twardowski. And this program was prepared for 3 hours a week. It is called by Twardowski only 3 hours per week, which is, of course, also for us nowadays impossible, because we are fighting for survival of the subject. First, we were fighting for introduction of the subject back to school, and now we have 1 hour, and this is not obligatory, and we are very happy, I think. And here, the problem for Twardowski was it was only 3 hours. Just to give you some context, before, during Galicia times, this last reform, there were 4 hours in Austro-Hungarian Empire. So kind of they lost 1 hour, but Twardowski probably would even like more hours. So that's why this program is very dry, we would say. And that's why we decided to call it minimalistic, because it is focused only on the very necessary things that Twardowski considered important. So it is limited very strictly to logic and psychology. So somebody could say that it is not really logic, it is not really philosophy, or could say that this is a little bit boring. But Twardowski was aware of that, and the reason for that was, as I say, limitation of time. Twardowski was, honestly, I had a chance to read finally, thanks to the GDP chat translation of the German program from 1900. And this program is a little bit more elaborated. So it seems that Twardowski still limited this program and also to fit into Polish conditions. The big issue related to this program was lack of textbook. We didn't have a textbook, and unfortunately, we will not have a textbook, Polish textbook, until 1938. So you can see that it's a very long process when we don't have a textbook. But one of the recommendations was the textbook that was prepared by Twardowski. It was not originally focused on usage in school, but rather for teacher training. But in consequence, it was recommended as part of it, especially the part related to logic. In case of psychology, it is very interesting is that the textbook for logic was recommended by Twardowski was Hoffler's, Alois Hoffler's textbook, which of course represents Brentano's psychology. And it was later translated into Polish and it was used as a textbook. So for so many years we have this this program, and there was a growing criticism around this program. On one side, even Twardowski was not satisfied because he considered this not enough hours, so he was continuing to claim that there should be more hours, and there is even a publication about that where he speaks openly about the need to increase the amount of hours, but also because there was a growing change in the attitude to education, and this program was considered very Austrian and very very old school, let's say, or old fashioned. There was a growing influence of new education movement that based on Deweyan vision of education, which should be very practical, very life oriented, related to experimentation. So this was considered very negative. And there was this long discussion. That's why we're going to present this discussion in the second paper, which I think is interesting contribution to this. We were not going to discuss this discussion, but there was a lot of different visions how to improve this subject and how to change this. So in the end, we can find in the archives this program that was translated and is going to be published in this special issue. This is the program from 1935, which we decided to call Maximali. Why? Because it is the program is so developed that you cannot do this in 3 hours a week. It is rather for 4 hours, if not even 5. And in consequence, it turned out this program was never published and it was never used because it is too large, but it shows significant differences. And this is again very interesting because we get out of this limitation of logic and psychology only. And the program is divided into parts. This is also, I think, inspiration from this Deweyan idea, new education movement, when there are blocks of problems. So we can see that there are blocks of problems related to thinking. There is a block of, and he stops using in this program this name logic or psychology. We have rather subjectivity, objectivity of cognition. We have, and interestingly in this, because there are 2 versions of this program, and in this first version we can even see such a romantic titles of this parts like beauty, good, and truth. Later in the second version of the program, it was crossed out and it was changed into more simple words like the issue of good, or no, the issue of I'm sorry, I forgot, but it was changed. I mean, it was not kept. And we can see what is also interesting. The most significant difference between the first version of this program and the second version, both are translated, is this part dedicated to logic. And it is almost totally different. And when I consulted, because I presented this in Vienna last year, in this Vienna Circle Society. So the first thing they said is, yes, this is Edukiewicz logic. I mean, this is the old school logic and this is the new logic. So probably this is the influence of Edukiewicz in this program, because we couldn't find information how this program was prepared. It is said that this program was prepared and was sent to the ministry along with the memorial, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. But generally, unfortunately, the program was not used. And it was said in the information related to the follow-up of the decisions by the ministry that this program was supposed to be sent to the authors of the new program, official program, as instruction. So something that they should refer to, but shouldn't copy. And because they should adjust the program also to this limitation of 3 hours. So, so I think that this is very interesting also for me, that Twardowski was able to get out of this limitation of logic and psychology. I'm not sure whether he was really happy about that, but I think it is interesting and important to see that he made this effort. Maybe he didn't like it, but he made this effort and he made it the best he could, and probably with this a company of Edukiewicz, but it was not official. But after this publication of this program, I mean, sending of this program by Polish Philosophical Society to the ministry, there came an official invitation from the ministry to Twardowski. But interestingly, in this invitation, not only Twardowski is invited, the invitation says that they invite Twardowski to prepare the program in cooperation with Kazimierz Andrukiewicz and Mieczysław Kreutz. So the question would be why it was not only Twardowski. Probably it's because they wanted some change and they wanted to keep Twardowski as the head of the project, but they also probably expected that Andrukiewicz's ideas and Kreutz, Mieczysław Kreutz was professor of psychology, that they might put this program into this new track. We don't know whether Kreutz really got engaged. Probably not. We don't have any sources. But as I say, but as we will see in a moment, it seems that Andrukiewicz's role in creation of this next program, it was significant. Because, as I said, this program was not published. But the next program that is published officially by the ministry, and it is called Temporary, as you can see on the left, in this Polish version, is a program published in 1937. So importantly, the context of war is probably here crucial, because probably this was the last moment to publish before the war. As you could see, the programs were published usually every 2 years, and this program was a novelty, so I suppose that that's why it's temporary, because they wanted to see how it worked and improve it. But probably the war stopped it, stopped the whole process. And what is interesting, we searched Edukiewicz archives, because in Twardowski's archives, we couldn't find anything that could be comparable to this from 1937. But it turned out that after searching content of the archive related to Edukiewicz's work, we found a program that is similar to this one. So it seems, because you don't have the name signature on the program, that this is the program that was prepared by at least by Edukiewicz. Why I say at least? Because on the right side you can see a piece from the letter of Edukiewicz to Twardowski. This is only a piece. We searched for the document, nobody could find continuation, but there is one of the sentences says, "I'm very glad about what you added to the program. I'm glad that you included this." And he cites a piece that is from this program. So it seems that it was also Twardowski's work. I consulted this with Professor Brożek, but also this is important. The context is also important, that it is also already the period when Twardowski is already very sick. He died next year, 1938. So might be that he didn't engage that actively in this program, or might be that he engaged. We don't know, and we will not know. But this program is much more limited than the one from 1935, and that's why we call it the more pragmatical. So something that was adjusted to the needs of the educational system. And interestingly, this program is divided again into blocks. but is different in content, and it seems that they much more focused on making it contemporary in case of this educational trends. And I think that there was also influence of Kreutz, because we have relation to some concepts that were typical to Kreutz, especially about the development of character. But of course, all these programs require further investigation and comparison, because I think they can offer some interesting information still. And my hope is that further investigation into these programs and comparing it with this Austrian program can be a proposal for contemporary education, because we struggle with this role of philosophy in schools. But interestingly, in Austria, they kept this program, this subject. They changed a little bit the title, because the title now is psychology and philosophy, but it is considered one subject taught in 2 grades by the same teacher, and there is a special training for teachers at the university, master in psychology and philosophy, to become a teacher of this particular subject. What is the consequence of this is that on Vienna University, on the first year of philosophy, they have around 1,000 students. So maybe this is a key to the problem, why we have a problem with students on philosophy departments. Maybe this is the answer, that we should have more philosophy, and maybe combining philosophy with psychology could show a little bit more of attractiveness of this subject, especially that it is our tradition and our heritage that we can refer to. And as I said, this program from 1935 was accompanied by memorial. And interestingly, this memorial was in manuscript in Twardowski's archive, and it was published by Ryszard Jadczak, a Polish philosopher professor who was also historian of Polish philosophy, history of philosophy. And this memorial was interestingly published in the same journal we are talking about now, which is Edukacja Filozoficzna, but it was still in 1988. To better understand the context of this program from 1935, we decided also to translate this program, because it shows also a lot of interesting things about how they saw teaching or practical teaching. And Jadczak is very clear here that it is Twardowski's work, this memorial. It might be that this was prepared with some other people, but we will not know probably. But what is interesting, that this type of publication is a very broad publication and very useful. And for me interesting is that there is a focus on discussion. Twardowski didn't recommend discussion before, because he believed, unfortunately, probably he was right, that to lead a discussion, you need to have very high qualifications. And most of the teachers of propadeutics, unfortunately, lacked these qualifications. And he was afraid that not prepared teacher to facilitate a discussion, in consequence, it will lead to just fights and disagreements, and will not have proper content and proper level of interchange of arguments and ideas. But in this memorial, you can see that there is a shift, which is for me interesting, that Twardowski kind of agreed. But maybe it's also interesting that there were publications later on by members of the school on discussion. There is Czerzowski's text on this problem, and there is also Kotarbiński's text on discussion. There is Witwicki's text on discussion. So it seems this problem was vivid, and they engaged with its popularization, especially that we know that Twardowski was also, this was his didactical method, especially in this philosophical circle that he led at the university. And what I wanted just to show you that this type of document, where there is a broader elaboration on how to teach philosophy, was also something that we can observe in this Lehrplan and Instruktionen from 1900. And this is the only elaboration, because there were 3 or 4 reforms, and usually there was just a short piece of information on the content, or just that there is logic and psychology. But this piece from 1900 is very elaborated. So it seems it is inspired probably somehow. And then afterwards we have this poradnik, which was published already by the ministry. And if you read it, it is also in this. It's in the same. It says 1935, and it is in the same style. It's like instruction. So it is an elaborated way of telling teachers how and what to teach. And in this poradnik there is additionally bibliography of books that can be used by the teachers to prepare interesting stuff. Okay, thank you very much. I hope it was interesting for you and inspiring maybe for some future research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ewelina, for this short presentation of this fantastic, interesting topic. Okay, are there any questions, comments to this presentation?
I don't know, should I turn off the presentation maybe?
Yes, perhaps it's a good idea. Okay, and do you maybe know what happened after the Second World War? Because we know that on academic level, first years after the war functioned just like before, so that the first students of philosophy had very good education, and only in late 40s and early 50s in Stalinist era, real philosophy was removed from universities. And I'm curious whether early years after the war were also philosophical in secondary schools in Poland. Do you know something about it?
Yeah, well, I didn't investigate that far because I think it requires to separate. But from this, what I read, I think it was a little bit similar. So because honestly, I even know from firsthand people who remember, or people who told me, oh, so my grandmother, she was right to tell me that she studied philosophy in high school. Like, you know, that... or I even Professor Dadaczyński, Priest Dadaczyński, who taught logic in our university, he said that he had a teacher of propadeutics. So and he was a very old guy. So I think so for some time it stayed, and it was removed with time, probably in the same time. Honestly, I don't remember exactly the date. But also there is this interesting story that there was some negotiations about propadeutic, and as long as I know, Kotarbiński and Edukiewicz decided in these negotiations to give up on these journals, philosophical journals, to close them, to keep propadeutic in school. It was kind of a burden. So I think it also shows the importance for them of propadeutic at school, which we neglect, I think, a little bit in our story about Lvov-Warsaw School, that they were more eager to close the journals, which means academic death, right, for them, and independence, just to keep propadeutic at schools. But of course, in the end, it didn't work, because in the end they removed it, but it seems that it was of high importance. But also interesting thing is that this subject was coming back. Professor Jadacki wrote a paper on that. There is a little bit more on this, what happened during communism. There was some discussions, was coming back in some form, but usually it was limited to logic. But also and it is interesting because I think, referring to this program from 1935, they kind of kept this part related to the society, and I think this was the cause. I think even Jadacki writes this in this paper, that they kind of removed all this philosophical and they kept this part about the state and society, and that's how we got the subject visa. I don't remember the name now, but there was the subject at school about society in the country. But also...
Wiedzę o społeczeństwie.
O, właśnie. knowledge about society. So you can see in this
Still
program
at schools as am I certified because my children
okay. So it seems this
attend
is
such
the
lessons.
leftover. I think it's supposedly the leftover from propedeutic of philosophy. Well, now we're going to have this new subject introduced next year, citizen education. So we hope that maybe there is some space for some philosophy and philosophical discussions about the state, for example. That is in the program of Twardowski from 1935, right? But also interesting thing is that speaking about the textbooks, because after this program from 37 was published, then we finally get the textbooks. And one of the authors was Edukiewicz, the textbook by Edukiewicz from 1938, Leleszówna, but also Gawecki. I don't know, Gawecki, we wouldn't consider him a member of the Lvov-Warsaw School, right? Or we would. I think I think he is not official, but his ideas, he was the instructor at the ministry that was responsible for propedeutic. And it seems he was maybe not a student, but it seems he was really in favor of all the ideas, because poradnik was prepared probably by him. And it really uses these classical words from the Lvov-Warsaw School, like clarity of thinking. And, it's like, it's clear that there is some influence. So anyway, he prepared the textbook for this program from 1937. And interestingly, this his textbook was reprinted in the 70s under a changed title, Thinking and Behavior. So, and it was used probably. So we can really see that this whole influence from Twardowski and his school continued somehow. And I think this is something that we need a little bit more investigation. And it is interesting how they could also adjust to these contemporary movements in education. So I think this shows the importance and significance of their work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you once again, Ewelina, for this paper and for your additional comments. And now let me introduce the second paper, which was prepared by Krzysztof Andrulonis. Unfortunately, Krzysztof had an emergency and couldn't join us today, but Filip Łapiński, Dr. Filip Łapiński agreed to present Krzysztof's paper. So please, Filip, and the paper concerns Izydora Domska as a teacher.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Filip Łapiński. I am a managing editor in Philosophical Education Journal. So I thought that maybe it would be great to just say a few words about the upcoming issue in general. I know that Anya has said a lot, but let me just add that we really managed, together with all the authors, we really managed to gather a huge amount of texts, around 10 articles. It's already quite a lot, but if we add more than 20 memories, contemporary and mostly archival, discussion on teaching logic nowadays, and few other texts, archival historical texts of Kazimierz Twardowski. It was so much that we decided to create 2 issues out of 1. So we will shortly, probably at the turn of March and April, publish the first issue, with entirely in English, and the other issue on the very same topic will be published a little later with English and Polish texts. And one of the articles that will be published very soon is the article of Krzysztof Andrulonis, a student from the University of Warsaw. And the title of the article is The Most Important Task and Great Personal Value. These 2 are quotes. Quote, the most important task, end of quote, and quote, great personal value, end of quote, the role of teaching and upbringing in the activities of Izydora Domska. So both these terms, both these descriptions, the most important task and great personal value, are the words of Izydora Domska herself and her own understanding. In this article, Mr. Andrulonis decided to present the role of teaching and upbringing in her philosophical achievements. Domska was deeply convinced that these issues are extremely important. Imparting knowledge to young people and shaping their minds is a necessary condition for the survival of philosophy as a discipline. Moreover, the exchange between one-sided, but goes in two ways. The lecturer also learns from his students. I may add that this sounds very contemporarily, not like very traditionally, but very contemporarily. So I think it's also interesting. It is no coincidence that Krzysztof Andrulonis treats the issues of teaching and upbringing together in his article. Dąbska herself believed that these two are inseparable. Acquired knowledge is important in the process of acquiring norms of conduct and creating one's own world of values. So in the article, the author tries to capture the specificity of Dąbska pedagogical views from the perspective of the opposition of axiocentrism and paidocentrism present in pedagogical sciences. The axiocentric approach sees man as a being with an innate tendency towards both good and evil. In order to raise him to prefer the former over the latter, it is necessary to promote in him an awareness of participating in a tradition that defines specific social roles and dictates moral norms. The task of a person raised in the spirit of axiocentrism is to struggle with their own weaknesses and the irremovable flaws of the world and other people in order to be able to avoid evil and be able to discover appropriate values that will make them a respectable participant in the cultural community. Supporters of paidocentrism, in the spirit of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophy, consider man to be a naturally good being whose development is potentially unlimited. His task is to free himself from tradition, to overcome its limitations in the name of self-realization. Paidocentrism also proposes a theory of values that is radically different from axiocentrism. Each person must establish themselves, and the fundamental criterion for assessing their importance is an individual decision. And Dąbska views cannot be easily placed in this opposition between these two views. They include elements of each of these attitudes, which was expressed, for example, in the fact that she was perfectly able to combine the role of authority and a partnership attitude towards students. Her educational ideal is certainly a person gifted with the ability to think critically, reluctant to dogmatism, open to different ways of learning about reality as well. When it comes to specific issues, Dąbska drew attention, among other things, to the need to include scientific ethics in school curricula, to show students that moral views do not have to be strictly related to religion, but can be grounded on a different basis. The author also postulated interdisciplinarity in teaching, consisting in the correlation of content taught in philosophical propedeutics, Polish language or modern foreign languages lessons. An important element of school teachings should also be the development of a logical culture in students, allowing them to think about everything clearly and lucidly. It is worth noting that many of her pedagogical views are similar to those of her mentor, Kazimierz Twardowski, which the author discusses in more detail in the article. Dąbska was not only a theoretician of pedagogy, but also a practical teacher. Before World War II, she worked in middle and high schools. During the war, she taught secretly in Lviv. And after 1945, she devoted herself to academic work once again. It was thanks to her and Roman Ingarden's joint efforts that independent philosophical studies were established at the Jagiellonian University. She treated their existence as a priority, because otherwise it could lead to the, quote, defeat of Poland's spiritual culture, end of quote. Dąbska adopted an uncompromising attitude towards the communist authorities, which resulted in her being, unfortunately, removed from teaching twice, in the years 1950 to 1957, and again after 1964. Despite this, she did not hesitate to openly side with the students during the events of March 68. her students perceived her as a modest, hardworking, empathetic person, demanding on the one hand, but understanding on the other. It seems fully justified to perceive her attitude as an academic teacher as similar to the model set at the dawn of European philosophy by Socrates himself. Domska's pedagogical views have retained their relevance up to this day, and she herself can be considered a role model, which all the more encourages us to look at her figure and achievements in the present day. And this is the summary of the article by Mr. Krzysztof Andrulonis. I may also add at the very end two things. The first one, that, and I believe that Mr. Nowicki will present this in more details, some memories from the members of the Lvov-Warsaw School will be about Izydora Domska. And since I'm not the author of the article, probably I should not be the person to respond to the questions that you may have, but I think it would be great if you still ask them, and I will be able to write them down and then hand them over to the author and message you after the webinar, so that we can continue our correspondence and I can gather the responses from the author. So if you have any questions, I will happily write them down.
Yes, thank you very much, Filip, for this presentation. Great. Yes, if you have any questions, comments, let's put them down. I can also try to answer this question, because Izydora Domska is someone really close to my heart, let's say. Let me only add that these two persons, namely Twardowski and Domska, have many elements in common, many features in common, but one of them is that it was really tragic moment for their students when they died, the moment of their death. In 1938, when Twardowski died, really it was like the whole school, the Lvov-Warsaw School, was orphaned. The texts which were written after Twardowski's death were very emotional. And it was the same with Domska, who had really a group of very close students. She led a seminar which was private. It was not in university, because she was removed from university by the Communist Party. So she led seminar at home with very close group of students. And for these students, when she died, it was like the end of an epoch, let's say. And it was also a very dark time for Poland, because it was in 1983, with little hopes for a better situation. And the students of Domska, some of them are still living philosophers, so they are they spoke about it at our meetings of our the Lvov-Warsaw School Research Center. They really felt like attend to her last way in Rudna Wielka. I mean, was an honor for them, and it was very tragic and important event in their lives. Okay, are there any questions, comments?
Yes, I would have a question then, because we speak about this comparison between Domska and Twardowski. So in relation to the writing the program, I was wondering whether Domska got engaged more in this pre-college education anyway, because I know that she wrote a paper on philosophical circles in schools, clubs.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about logic, right? I'm not sure about the importance of teaching logic, but it is interesting to know.
Yes, I don't have the list of Izydora Domska's papers here, but I may easily check what are titles and dates of publishing these papers. Well, Domska was a high school teacher before the Second World War. She was teaching in Lvov gymnasia. Both she was teaching Polish and I think also propedeutics of philosophy. It's easy to find out, no problem, I will do it. And also she was very much involved in secret education during the Second World War. And from this period, we have several fantastic memories of her students, of how she was teaching on this secondary level. So for sure, it was very important for her also. Yeah, so this feature is also something common with Twardowski, obviously.
But I can, of course, since it was mentioned in the summary that, yes, she worked before the war in high schools, but I can ask Krzysztof about further details. Maybe she wrote something more about this. Yeah.
Yeah, there is because Isidora Domska is a person which is the object of interest of many groups, including, of course, Krakow when she created this group, but also in Wrocław there is a group of historians of philosophy who recently wrote many about Isidora Domska, and also they published the first volume of her biography. So I think that in this volume you may find all these answers to all these questions. I think it's quite detailed biography.
So it just leads me to this other topic of maybe preparing something on who really taught in high school and what were their experiences, because I think we keep talking about this when we talk about the person, but if somebody asks me, I cannot really tell. I know that just few people, but it seems there was more people, and I think it will be also valuable to kind of, you know, get them together. Just
no, not a problem, Ewelina. In our Encyclopedia of the Lvov-Warsaw School, you will get all the data. I may send you the a preliminary version of that, and there are all informations about the places of work, gymnasia when they work. All of it is present.
Yeah, but the question would be also if they have any kind of memories. I mean, any written things in the diaries, any commentaries. Not even like official, like publications of books or programs, but rather something, you know, rather personal. What they thought about this moment. I know that not everybody liked that, or whether they consider this important or whether they consider this, let's say, degradation. Because I think that before the war, teaching in high school didn't have such a low prestige like nowadays. I would say, yes. That before the war, teaching in high school was something prestigious, and I think even a PhD was a normal thing, except for the fact that also teachers published papers, which is also something that many people are shocked about. There are reports from each high school at the end of the year, and there are publications of articles prepared by the teachers and research they done. So it shows totally the gap we have nowadays between these two levels of education.
I have a question to the other members of the webinar, because if we are able to gather a response from the author, or maybe some data that Anya could gather, maybe you would like to just receive them on the email as well, together with Ewelina, who asked the question. We could just send you the answer as the aftermath of the webinar, if you are interested.
I am for. I think it's a good idea.
I take it as cautious, yes.
Okay. So I unfortunately lost my laptop because of the low battery, but I'm now I'm connecting with you by my phone. I hope that you can hear me. And sorry for this technical problems, but you know, Zoom possibilities of Zoom are incredible, and I'm connecting with you from my car. And now let me introduce the last talk for today. It's a talk of Krzysztof Nowicki from University of Warsaw. Krzysztof prepared translations of various shorter or longer texts about teachers from the Lvov-Warsaw School. Today he will present a short presentation on these memories on Kazimierz Twardowski and Isidora Domska.
Okay, can I share my screen? Okay. Do you see maybe my screen already?
Oh, now we can see.
Yes, right now.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. As already mentioned, I would like to say a few words about the text of reminiscences about two important members of Lvov-Warsaw School we heard talks about already. And as already said, the translations for this text will be included in forthcoming volume on philosophical education and Lvov-Warsaw School. And in my talk, I will make some general remarks about this text, then outline the general picture of the model philosopher that emerges from them, and finally briefly review the text for what makes them stand out from the rest of them. These are texts written by Domska's and Twardowski's students who had the opportunity to speak about their teachers in various circumstances. Some of these texts are written while the subject of these memories are still alive. Others are written immediately after the deaths, in case of texts on Twardowski's, and still others are written long afterwards. The perspective of the writer is also different, as some of these texts are written before the Second World War and others after this great tragedy, and in a system which, to put it mildly, was not very positive towards the idea of independent thinking. Most of the collected memoirs concern Kazimierz Twardowski. This is explained at least by two considerations. Firstly, it was Twardowski activity that led to the formation of the school and its specific ethos, including a teaching ethos. Secondly, although there were many eminent teachers in the Lvov-Warsaw School, I think one can venture to say that the most eminent of them was precisely Kazimierz Twardowski. In his text, Łapiński even called Twardowski a didactic genius, which, given number of doctorates he had supervised, nearly 50, can hardly be called an exaggeration. The volume will also include two texts on Izydora Domska, who was, as already mentioned, student of Twardowski. These vividly show that in her activities she embodied the ideals she took over for Twardowski. Her natural inclination further sharpened the existential role of as responsible and scientific philosophizing, which she expressed in the form of the maxim, non est necesse vivere, necesse est philosophari. What is particularly interesting about this text is that the certain image of the model philosopher emerges from them. For even if we recognize that these texts, due to the circumstances in which they are delivered, may contain an admixture of idealization of the figure mentioned, it is nevertheless significant that all these authors attribute to them a similar range of characteristic, which clearly indicates that they all shared a common system of values characteristic of Lvov-Warsaw School. If one wanted to put these values into a simple slogan, it would probably read scientific philosophy as a way of life. From the text of remembrances, Twardowski and Domska emerge as philosophers who embody this system of values and who transmit this model of philosophizing to their students, both by the content of their teaching and by their example. The system of values includes those that are often mentioned in the context of studies on the Lvov-Warsaw School, such as care for clarity and preciseness in speaking and thinking, concern for adequate justification of the views proclaimed, and uncompromising and methodical pursuit of truth and objectivity. It is this characteristic that led many scholars to qualify the Lvov-Warsaw School as a strand of analytic philosophy. One can quote here, as seen on the screen, for example, a passage from Domska's text in which she says this about Twardowski. Putting forward the postulate of the scientific practice of philosophy, Twardowski's clarity and precision of philosophical statements and their proper justification. One can also quote Ajdukiewicz, who says this about Twardowski's teaching style. Twardowski's didactic work focused precisely on freeing oneself from haziness, to see through a transparent current whether the essence of the matter is depth or shallowness, and to instill in listeners the need for clear thinking and a disdain for platitudes disguised as profundity. In Domska's case, one can recall Stamirowska's words about the course of Domska's seminars. The aim was to reach the true meaning, to grasp the essential thought of the author. The evening meetings were a shared search for truth, not a display of erudition or rhetoric. This is how we learn to read and understand philosophical texts. This is how certain needs and habits were formed, which I believe to remain equally important also for those of us who later moved away from philosophy. This last remark also underlines another important characteristic of the Lvov-Warsaw School's teaching. It was the teaching of strict and clear thinking, which was not limited to academic issues, but which carried over into other areas of life. However, if one were to stop there, the picture would be incomplete. For what emerges from the text is at the same time the image of a philosopher who is guided not only by clear and precise thinking, but also by high moral standards. One who values conscientiousness, courage, and justice. As Domska attests, according to Twardowski, practicing philosophy is not just about solving certain theoretical problems. It is also a path of deepening and improving moral character, a path to internal independence and self-mastery. To be a philosopher is not only to realize certain intellectual values, but also moral ones. This model of philosophizing is also what Twardowski passed on to his student, as is pointed out by Czerzowski. He educated, which means he shaped characters, instilling in his students ethical principles and dispositions of will. Ethical principles, faith in the existence of absolute values of truth and goodness, as goals of selfless pursuit. Dispositions of will, dutifulness, conscientiousness, thoroughness, reliability. In a similar vein, Obercowa comments on Domska. I think she taught us much more than grammar and who wrote what. Then, and even today, I sometimes think, if I did this or that, what would she have said about it? I believe she taught us, above all, to distinguish good from evil, baseness from honesty, and not just to distinguish, but to persistently, stubbornly defend the most valuable virtues inherent within a person, even at the cost of one's own life. But this is not enough for a complete picture. The portraits that emerges from the memoirs are not just intellectual ascetics, fenced off from the world by the gates of the university, who only educate their students and send them into the world, but people who use their acquired intellectual dispositions to shape the social and cultural environment in which they reside, regardless of how difficult external circumstances could be. In Twardowski's case, this refers to organizational activities at all levels of education, popularizing science, as well as giving advice to people not connected with the university. This is how Panenkova writes about him. Endowed with an inexhaustible sense of initiative and extraordinary organizational skills, he continually established new cultural and educational institutions, or revived old ones. In similar vein, Ajdukiewicz writes, his outstanding organizational talent earned him exceptional authority, both within the university and with the state authorities who had a decisive voice in many university matters. In Domska's case, it is an organization of secret teaching during the Second World War, even despite the grave danger. As Obercowa attests, she was the first in Lvov to decide to organize secret teaching. When, in July 1931, the delegate Wicek came from Warsaw to Lvov to organize secret teaching, Miss Iza provided him with a complete roster of 20 study groups, each consisting of 4 to 6 people at the secondary educational level, already operating at full capacity. Unfortunately, the post-war reality meant that Domska non-scientific activities were significantly limited. All qualities listed here make up an important part of the model image of the philosopher that Domska and Twardowski embodied with their lives. While this is certainly not an exhaustive characterization, it gives us an insight into what they conveyed through their teaching to their student. I will now speak briefly about the content of each text. As a lot of information is repeated, I will only mention what is kind of unique to each of these texts. I was not sure what others speaker will say, so I went pretty lean on the details of Twardowski non-scientific activities Kazimierz Ajdówkiewicz was about. But I think one should at least mention that among those important practical organizational achievements are the facts that Twardowski was 3 times a rector of Jan Kazimierz University, and he had important impact on administrative regulations. He was the founder of the Polish Philosophical Society, founder of the journal. He was founder of the journal Ruch Filozoficzny, Philosophical Movement, in translation. He was at the helm of the Society of Teachers of Secondary and Higher Schools, and all those things are just the tip of the iceberg. And also Twardowski had important contribution in popularizing science. Stefan Balej, in turn, mentions Twardowski's role in the formation of scientific psychology in Lvov. He emphasizes both his role in teaching psychology in a strict and precise way, as well as his role in establishing psychological department at the Jan Kazimierz University. In his text, Tadeusz Czerzowski describes Twardowski's influence on philosophy in Poland at large, as well as the components that make up his teaching activity, the ideal of philosophical education, the teaching method, and its implementation. In a similar vein, Isidora Domska emphasizes Twardowski's contribution to the formation of a scientific style of philosophizing in Poland. She sees the source of his activity in his love of 2 ideals, objective truth and moral goodness, and of course, a love for his students. In describing Twardowski, Zygmunt Łępicki puts an emphasis on the fact that Twardowski respected the individuality of students and taught them responsibility for the world. Moreover, he highlights Twardowski's contribution to the development of Polish spiritual culture and his exemplary civic virtues. Irena Panenkova recalls Twardowski as an organizer of cultural and educational life in Lvov. She points out that although Twardowski was initially skeptical of female students, over time he changed his attitude and proudly referred to her as her first female doctor. In his reminiscences, Władysław Witwicki draws out the cultural context in which Twardowski had to work. In particular, he points out that his intelligible and clear style contrasted with the popular thought trends of the time, which attracted whole crowds to him. Witwicki notes that despite his rigorous attitude, Twardowski was sensitive to beauty and music. Similar remarks can also be found in the text by Zygmunt Zawierski, who further emphasizes that Twardowski was an authority not only on academic matters, but also on ordinary human affairs. He recalls a number of stories in which people not normally associated with university asked him for advice. In her reminiscences about Domska, Maria Oberts describes, as already mentioned, Domska's activities in secret teaching during the Second World War. She sees the source of this activity in Domska's belief in the fundamental role of education, which is worth undertaking and providing despite the risk. And last, Krystyna Stamirowska recollection describes Dąbska moral character, who taught attitudes not only with words, but with her own example. In addition, she describes her university activities, including her seminars, which were different from others because they taught not only how to read, but also how to thoroughly understand the text being read. I think that the most appropriate way to conclude this brief talk is to recall the words of Kazimierz Twardowski to his students. I tried to instill in your souls what is the best part of my own soul: sincere love for work, ardent love of truth, and earnest striving for justice. And thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much, Krzysztof, for this great presentation on the content of these reminiscences. And I have an idea. I don't know what would the editor-in-chief and generally the editorial team would say, but I think that this paper should be included into the volume as an introduction to this last part. I think that it would be great if only there is a place still some place in our volume, which will be really big. But it's a wonderful introduction to these papers. Yes, great. Thank you very much for this presentation. Are there any questions, comments to Krzysztof's presentation?
I think it really encouraged to read memories in their
Yeah.
entirety. I have the privilege to have access to them right now, but I would just recommend you to read once they're published.
Well, I have a question. I don't know if we have answers for this kind of questions. Perhaps I should just read some more materials, but I wonder if Twardowski tried to justify his position about the objectivity of truth and objectivity of beauty and so on, because, well, I do believe in that, but when you are a philosopher, you're expected to justify your position. But at the same time, well, I guess that perhaps people who believed him that he is right just observed him, and he was the justification. Yeah, so they wanted to follow him because they saw that he is a brilliant person, and if he believes in that, then, well, they should do the same, because the fruits of his views are great. Yeah, so perhaps this was the case. I don't know if you can give me an answer that will just decide the question. Yeah.
I don't know, Krzysztof, would you like to answer?
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm ready to answer it in all entirety, but of course there's a well-known text about on the so-called relative truth in case of analytic absolutism, but in case of moral Twardowski moral philosophy, I would need to gather my thoughts, and I'm not sure whether I can do it so quickly. But I can say that, unfortunately, it will not be in our volume, but there's an article about Twardowski by Grądzka, where she also tackles on this problem, on those ethical problems that were dear to Twardowski's heart. And I remember there is this if I remember it correctly, the contrast between individual moral stance and the social responsibility. and how they interacted in Twardowski's philosophy, and Grądzka there claimed that it was somehow unresolved tension, but somehow his attitude as a person, in Grądzka's eyes at least, was a resolution of this tension, because he embodied both at the same time. It's only, I don't have the text at this moment, but if I remember correctly, this is how she described it. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
there is
thank
also
you.
reminiscence by Słoniewska, where Słoniewska indicates bad features of Twardowski, namely that he was a cruel person because he expected that any order, because Słoniewska was his assistant, yeah, and of course as assistant she has to be obedient, yeah, to the professor. So every order had to be realized, yeah, in a very strict way, with no discussion and so on. And at first, Słoniewska didn't like such an attitude, yeah, such a relation, and proposed some modifications to the order, some new solutions, and Twardowski completely didn't understand that and an order could be discussed between the assistant and professor. So in the academia, in these relations between students and professor, he was very strict and just, and in fact students had to follow the rules and so on. But I think that Marcin also asked about to what degree Twardowski was a model for them. So he really was a model. And if they could observe, they could watch how he behaves, that he really does not difference between, for instance, people he knows personally and people that he doesn't know from, I don't know, Lvov environment. He does no differences between male and female students, between Polish and Ukrainian students. So it was an incarnation of justice for them, I think. And of course, in private life, he tried to implement also the values of mercifulness and so on. He helped people in difficult situations, but it was his private life. Okay, in the academia, there were rules that should be followed, and the justice was the principle. And by doing that, he was really respected and loved by his students. Okay, Ewelina?
Yes, if I could just add a comment, which I think is also for me significant, is that one way that he was an example for his students, but as long as I understand, he also learned from his students or treated seriously some of the comments. And for me, it was significant when I observed this in this development of the program, because we are always presenting Twardowski as if we're like a strict, decisive person who has rather stiff ideas. But I think this observation of the program, how he managed to adjust and accept some changes and developments, even though probably deep inside he didn't really agree with them, shows that he was able of learning and changing ideas. And as long as I understand, he started to do this research into medieval philosophy also because of the inspiration from one of the students, Łukasiewicz, I think you mentioned once. So I think this is also important, that I think that the mastery is when you are able to learn from your students as well and get this inspiration, which shows the greatness of the person. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because this idea of no discussion and following and orders is only in the case of professional relations, not in the philosophical discussions. Of course, on the level of philosophical discussions, Twardowski was open for discussion, for argumentations, for other theses, and he's even known for that, and in this way he was different than Brentano, who very rarely changed his mind. Twardowski was ready to change his mind if arguments were really strong. If only the arguments were presented clearly and they were presented in a strong way, convincing way. Yeah? So in this case, of course, he in philosophical discussions, he treated his students as partners, of course, after they were trained in the way he projected it.
And interestingly, this is also, I think, in this book, Zasadnicze pojęcia, the logiki, dydaktyki. I remember, I forgot the translation. Professor, you wrote the translation in the entrance. I don't remember how it is translated. You don't remember? Okay.
The foundational
basically,
terms of
yeah,
what
but
you said?
I wanted to use this correct, the same translation we have, because I don't think this text is translated as a separate text, right?
This book from 1901 is not translated.
It's not translated, right?
Yes,
So-
yes. It
so-
would be to
So what is important, he writes in this book these recommendations for teachers, and one of the things he writes, and I think one of the things that is keep forgetting, and it's important in the context of new reforms that keep coming, and even in discussion about artificial intelligence, is that nowadays we reduce the teacher to the transmitter of knowledge only. And Twardowski shows and also talks about this, that the teacher is the personality that is giving an example to students. And this is this role of the teacher that is being disappearing. And that's why we can speak about changing teacher for ChatGPT or any other source, because if it is only about the knowledge, then of course, this is no problem to get a robot into the classroom to give a lecture. But this is the thing, that the teacher is something much bigger. And I think for Twardowski, it was clear that a gymnasium teacher and philosopher and as a professor is something much bigger than transmission of knowledge only.
Yes, of course. And his preference of formal teaching, namely teaching skills, over material teaching, namely teaching just the content, some contents here to remember. It was stressed so many times that it was really something of the first importance to him. Great, wonderful. I think that it was really inspiring meeting. Thank you very much to you all. I think we will keep in touch concerning the volume, this volume, the second, because as Filip rightly emphasized, we are preparing 2 volumes about philosophical education in the Lvov-Warsaw School. Yes, Filip, you would like to add something?
Just to add that since I believe we've exhausted the topic of the first of these 2 issues during our webinars, this is the second webinar of ours. In April, we will have the 3rd webinar that will present some articles from that second issue. So I encourage you to join. We'll be sending information.
Great, great. I see that there is Maciej Wołko with us today, who is one of authors of papers to the second volume. So I hope that Maciej would like to join us in April. And
Exactly.
yeah, great. It would be great to meet once again and discuss the second volume. Great. Thank you once again for your presence today.
I would also like to thank all of you, our participants, for coming, and our speakers for really brilliant papers, brilliant presentations. I learned a lot. Thank you personally. And till next time, goodbye.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.